5 sleepwalking homicides that will shock you. Many criminals proclaim innocence after committing their crimes. While many are lying, the people on this all had a similar and unique defense. They were all asleep when breaking the law. Here are 5 sleepwalking homicides that will shock you. Number 5. Joseph Mitchell. On the early morning of September 22, 2010, 50-year-old Joseph Mitchell from Durham County, North Carolina, went inside his 4-year-old son's bedroom and smothered him to death. When police arrived at the scene, they found 4-year-old Blake Mitchell dead. But according to Joseph, he didn't mean to kill his son or attack his 2 other children because he wasn't even aware of what he was doing. Mitchell's 2 other kids, 10-year-old Devin and 13-year-old Alexis, told police they awoke when their father came into their room and tried to cover their mouths and faces to suffocate them. Alexis remembers someone pressing her head against the mattress. She passed out briefly, but woke up when she heard her younger brother Devin screaming. When he was arrested, Mitchell's lawyers argued that their client wasn't aware of what he did and that he was sleepwalking, invoking the automatism defense. They argued Joseph was not guilty of the crime because he was asleep, therefore unconscious of what he was doing. During the trial, an expert witness testified that Joseph had non-rapid eye movement parasomnia, a sleep disorder causing sufferers to do random acts involuntarily while in a half-sleep state. The defense added that Mitchell was suffering from severe stress and lack of sleep, stressors which prompted the sleepwalking and consequently the attack. Although the prosecution countered by painting Mitchell as a serial liar and someone desperate to get out of a likely foreclosure, the defense ultimately won the case. The jury came back with a not guilty verdict, proclaiming Mitchell to be innocent of first-degree murder. His wife Christine was inconsolable after hearing the decision, exclaiming she failed to protect her son. She had to be wheeled out of court in a stretcher. For the jury, it was a difficult position. Joseph Mitchell himself asked if he could be given an involuntary manslaughter sentence instead, but the state objected, since accepting the charge would mean admitting guilt and going against the automatism argument. Later on, after Mitchell was freed, some of the jurors expressed disbelief and even shame they had to turn out a not guilty verdict for him. However, they didn't have a choice since, according to them, the prosecution failed to provide ample proof Mitchell was indeed guilty and aware he committed the act. Number 4. Kenneth Parks. Kenneth Parks was a 23-year-old native of Toronto, Canada. He was married and the couple had a 5-month-old daughter at the time of this incident. While everything seemed fine on the outside in the summer of 1986, Parks secretly developed a bad gambling addiction. This caused him to go into debt, turning his finances into shambles. It got so bad that he began stealing money from their family's savings and then ultimately embezzling about $30,000 from his work. His bosses found out about the embezzlement and he was fired from his job by March of 1987. On May 20th of that year, he was desperate to fix his addiction and began attending a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. He had planned to come clean to his grandmother and in-laws on May 23rd and 24th, respectively, about his situation and the gambling addiction. In the early morning of May 24th, 1987, Kenneth left his home and drove 20 kilometers to Scarborough, Ontario, heading to Barbara and Dennis Wood's home, his in-laws. He took out a tire iron from his car, then went inside the house using a key he had been given. He marched straight into the bedroom, then choked his father-in-law, Dennis, until he was unconscious. Then he took the tire iron and beat up Barbara. At some point, he had gotten a knife and stabbed both victims repeatedly. Then at around 4:45 a.m., Kenneth drove himself to the police station. He was distraught, shaking, and he told police that he had killed 2 people, his in-laws. Authorities observed that even though he had injuries, cut tendons in his hands, he didn't seem fazed by it. You would think a case like this was closed since you have a man confessing to murder, but the problem with all this was that Kenneth, despite realizing he killed his in-laws, was not fully aware he was killing them when it was happening because he was asleep. Ever since he was young, Kenneth had suffered from parasomnia and other sleeping disorders. During the investigation, he was subjected to various sleep and psychological tests, and it showed he had abnormal brain activity when he was in deep sleep and had periods of awakenings. This signaled parasomnia and sleepwalking. Because the EEG results were deemed accurate and Kenneth had felt no pain during the attack, it was proclaimed he was sleepwalking. Experts said that the day before, Kenneth had already planned on going to his in-laws' home to tell them about his problems. He was also worried about his upcoming trial for embezzlement. In the end, Kenneth was fully acquitted for the attack on his in-laws, which resulted in the death of Barbara Woods. Dennis Woods was heavily injured, but he did survive. Other people, however, argue it's possible Kenneth may have been awake during the attack and not sleepwalking. It's possible he may have immediately repressed the memory of the killing right after it happened. Many also questioned why he wasn't roused from a deep sleep if he was indeed sleepwalking during such a vicious attack. Number 3. Jules Lowe. It was October of 2003 when a neighbor spotted the lifeless body of 83-year-old Edward Lowe in his family home in Walkden, Greater Manchester, England. He was badly beaten, receiving over 90 bruises, broken bones, and so much more, in what was determined to be a prolonged attack involving kicking and stomping. The night before, Edward was seen drinking at a bar with his son Jules and his business partner. Jules Lowe shared the home with his dad. He had never shown any violence whatsoever towards his father and in fact had a great relationship with him. When Edward was found dead, Jules was the first suspect and he was immediately arrested. But according to him, he had fallen asleep after drinking heavily that night and had no knowledge of what happened to his father. Investigators, however, pointed to Jules as the person responsible for the attack. Evidence showed that the assault had started in his home, spanning all 3 floors. When the case went to trial, Jules argued automatism and said he was asleep or not aware of what he was doing at the time. Surprisingly, the jury sided with him, proclaiming he was not guilty of his father's death. He was also found not insane. A year after the killing, Jules was ordered to be detained in a hospital. He had gotten into trouble by assaulting an officer. He was also arrested for being drunk and disorderly at a hotel while attending a murder mystery weekend. Number 2. Simon Fraser. At 27 years old, Simon Fraser, a Scotsman from Glasgow, was a happily married and devoted father. But on the night of April 10, 1878, he was dreaming a monster had appeared from the floor and was attacking his family. Fraser jumped up from bed, grabbed the monster by the neck, and slammed it hard against the ground. His screaming wife jolted him awake, and he was horrified to find that instead of a monster, in his hands was the limp body of his 18-month-old son. He had smashed the young boy's head into the wall. Simon was sent to court, and during the trial, he never denied killing his child, but said in his mind he was actually defending him from the monster. Family members also testified this wasn't the first time Simon had gotten violent while sleepwalking. He had suffered from night terrors as a child, several of which involved violent episodes. His own sister testified, saying her brother had strangled her once. In that instance, Simon said he was dreaming he had jumped into the sea to try to save his sister from drowning. His father also said he woke up one time with Simon, then a teenager, straddling and beating him in bed. After hearing these testimonies, the foreman for the jury said there was no need to hear any more. They were already unanimous in the decision Simon wasn't responsible for the murder. The court then asked for expert testimony whether Simon was sane enough to be set free or not. One expert said he was sane, while the other one said he wasn't and should be committed to an asylum. But after hearing the expert testimony, the jury didn't even need to retire to a private room to discuss. They simply had a whispered conference right there in the courtroom and decided Simon was sane and could go free. But of course, there were still dangers as to the fact Simon still wasn't cured of his problem. so special arraignments were stipulated. During the day, he was a free man, but at night, he was going to sleep alone in a room. It would be locked from the outside, and only his wife would keep the key. Number 1. Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas from Neath, South Wales, was known as a decent and devoted husband. Ever since he was a child, Brian was prone to sleepwalking. He would often wake up with cuts on his feet and even random stones in his bed. As he grew older, he never sought treatment for his problem and really didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. But as years went by, his sleep problems only became worse. He was later given antidepressants, which he often stopped taking for months at a time since he believed they made him impotent. In July of 2008, Brian and Christine, his wife, decided to go out on a short trip in their camper van. The couple drove from their home near Swansea to the port town of Aberporth. It was a chance to unwind after Christine suffered from a cancer scare. To hunker down for the night, they parked their camper van in a public car park. But that night, several boys turned up close to the parking lot, revving their engines and doing wheel spins. As Brian slept, he had a violent nightmare. He dreamt that one of the boy racers, a man wearing blue jeans and a fleece jacket, broke into their van. The man was on top of his wife, and Brian fought the intruder, grappling against him. The next day, when he woke up, Brian found Christine unresponsive in his arms. He tried to get her up, but to no avail. He then called police distraught, saying he thought he had killed his wife, and attempted to explain how he thought someone broke into the home, but there was no one there. When police arrived, they found Brian outside the camper van, deeply distressed. He was arrested for strangling his wife and murdering her. But during the trial, there was little for prosecution to go on, and they ended up withdrawing the case within just a week. The jury was told by the judge to proclaim Brian Thomas not guilty for killing his wife due to automatism. Those who knew him, friends and family, stood by Brian and said it was just a tragic case. They defended him, saying he loved his wife dearly and would never knowingly do anything to harm her. So there were 5 sleepwalking homicides that will shock you. Night terrors happen to about 40% of children and a good amount of adults. Some people outgrow them, but sometimes they carry on late into adulthood. Cases like this are rare, but they do happen, and they're devastating to all the people involved. If you enjoyed watching this video, then please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We have new videos every Wednesday and Saturday that we know you want to check out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.